My name is Lucien Avramov. I'm a product manager for one of the products we announced today called Anthos Migrate. And the purpose of the session of our time today is to go over our product and talk about our real case use cases for the product. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. If it's not loud enough, we'll have it raised up if possible. So with that, let's begin. Here is our agenda for the next 45 minutes, 50 minutes. At first, I'd like to talk with you about modernization. So what does that mean, and why do we do it? Then we'll go and deep dive into Anthos Migrate per se, and talk about it. So what is it? What's the overview? What are the benefits of this product that we announced? And then we'll go into our customer panel. So I'm fortunate to have three gentlemen with us today that will come and have a conversation with us. And they've been looking at our technology and thinking about their use cases and how it makes sense for them. So I would say the second part of our talk will be more interactive, and we'll have a conversation where I'll moderate the talk with our customers. So without further ado, let's go with modernization. And first, I'd like to ask in the room, how many of you have a sense of what modernization means? Can I get a raise of hand? Okay, about 20%. So we'll start with that. We'll start with what it is, and then I'll explain you why. So in my own words, modernization is about basically get on-premise, get legacy virtualized environments, and getting them to you in a way where you can actually run them as containers, where you can operate them with less overhead for for basically programmability, upgrades, patching, and how to run in a cloud environment in a more automatic way, where you can start, once you are there, leveraging cloud products and cloud tools that we offer. So this is kind of our view of modernization. So I would say if you take a virtual machine as a starting point, and we get to an endpoint which would be running on a container, and having CI/CD pipeline instrumentation, having monitoring, troubleshooting tools real time that will show you what your application is doing with the rest of the world. How many customers are touching it, how many connections per second, who this application is talking with, which other application interfaces with, what's the latency, and so forth. That's one part. And then another part is, well, how do I upgrade my application? How do I patch it? How do I move it? How do I make sure it scales? And so once you are in this environment, you are modernized. And so this is what modernization means to me. And now what I'd like to cover is basically to see why, why we're doing it, why we're modernizing. So enterprise IT is complex. Why is it complex? Because you're in an environment where you have multiple different systems in your infrastructure. You may have virtualized environments, you may have bare metal, you may have legacy, middleware, and basically you land up in an environment where you have a bunch of things to make work, and you need to make them evolve because you're tasked to evolve the system. So your initial starting point is complicated, and that's what you have, and that's your environment. And basically, for your company and your environment to be responsive and competitive, it has to quickly evolve. If you have a new application coming up, a new service that you want to offer to your customers, you have to quickly do it. And so on one hand, you're facing the environment that exists. And on another hand, there's a need of more and more agility into your environment, faster and faster deployment times for applications, and so forth. And so we started being a place where we need to do trade-offs. And the trade-offs are in three different types, basically. One is about security and agility. So you want to be agile, but at the same time, you want your application to be secure enough. And so you started think to how to get more agile, but at the same time, your security teams would not want this to be more impactful with the data. So you have to think about these two, how they coexist. That's number one. Number two is reliability and cost. So you want to basically have an infrastructure that is where cost is less and less and so forth, but at the same time, you want it reliable. You don't want to have failures. You don't want to have outages. You want uptime and SLOs. You want to make sure that if you have customers using your environment that are in Asia, in Europe, in the US, that based on who they are and where they are, they have a latency and an application response time that suits what you want to provide to them. And same for internal applications. So if you are hosting your internal application somewhere on the cloud, you want to make sure that A, it works, and two, that it works well enough with the proper performance, right? And then number three is portability and consistency. So how can I move my application to a different environment? How can I go from my on-premise to the cloud? How can I go back from the cloud to an on-premise? How can I have multiple clouds coexist and at the same time be agile? If a new service appears somewhere and I want my application to benefit from it, I'd like to move it there. And so that's the thinking of the trade-offs that we need to do in order to basically modernize an environment. And basically, what we need to embrace is how do we do new things? How do we transform this IT environment versus doing the same thing somewhere else, right? So, what a CIO of a media company found is that 90% of legacy apps would not be optimized by moving to the cloud. But by just moving an application doesn't mean that you start benefiting from all what the cloud has to offer you. And if you don't modernize, what happens? Well, you have underutilized resources, you have turnover, some people may go somewhere else, losing interest and so forth. Downtime, you have downtime as well because you're not more modern, you don't have a 24/7 reliability, you have to have maintenance windows, you have to take downtime to upgrade, and so that's another part of not modernizing. And third, well, you may be locked in with specific vendors and not have the agility to move when you want to move. And there's more and more this need to adapt yourself to the environment because there's so many new ways to do business and to do technical application deployments and so many new softwares and ways of doing the same thing somewhere else and in other ways that you want to give yourself the chances to succeed. And this is why we're so much thinking about modernization and why we're spending time on this product for modernizing. And so basically, the fact that you will modernize, it's not that it's basically an end of something and you have to rebuild and figure out how to do it. It's basically a way to find a different way to build your environment in a modernized infrastructure. Okay? And so the technologies for modernization, here I put the 5 key ones that I see. Microservices. What does microservices mean? Microservices means the flexibility to move at the speed that your developers move. Okay? Containers. Containers means repetitive, repeatability and scalability. You can run something you can have an application that's portable and that can be repeated and moved to various places in a faster way, okay? Orchestration. What does orchestration mean? It means that we have systems that will automate and move these applications where it makes sense, when it makes sense. CI/CD, what is that? That means that you will be shipping code hourly and you will be agile. You won't be on a quarterly basis, for example, the development release. You will just push the code when it's available and when it's tested. And these are kind of the services and API management. So, automate your management with basically having an API framework where you will touch other applications and you will have a tight integration between different parts of your life cycle, different applications in your life cycle, right? So these are the technologies that are part of this modernization journey. It is a big deal when we look at customer surveys and basically market surveys. Migration and modernization are a big deal. What you see here is migrating existing applications to the cloud. Most people believe in that, right? Evolving the application is also important and top of mind. So these are really key aspects in terms of modernizing infrastructure, and that's what we get from markets. Now, the problem with that is that it's actually complicated. It's hard. It's a hard thing to do. Everyone wants to modernize, but how do we do it? And when we look at some more data, more statistics, over 90% of enterprises migration projects face delays over budget, right? Why is it so hard? Number one, the scale. So you have thousands of workloads, for example, in a data center, and you need to move that to the cloud. How do you do it? So you will start evaluating solutions doing at a scale of 1, 10, 20 workloads. How do you do this at scale? How do you go thousands of VMs? How do you move a physical data center to the cloud? It's a hard thing to do. It involves planning, understanding the framework, the architecture, the networking, the security bits, and then being able to do that on the cloud so it's actually an extension of your environment. Multi-source. Well, there are certain things that you cannot move to the cloud for legal reasons, for practical reasons. There's a bunch of different reasons where you will need to run still certain application on your data center at physical locations, and they should coexist with the ones that you move. And so therefore, when you move certain things away, run them on the cloud, and they have to talk to your on-premise, you need to make sure that where they are, again, latency is good enough, response time, SLAs, and all these things, right? So that's multi-source. 3, well, the applications are complex, multi-tier applications. If we look at databases, if we look at services that you run, typically they're developed by someone, and then oftentimes you know that the application is running and it's a complex application solving one of the things in your environment, in your company, but you don't know how to upgrade it, you don't know what it's doing, and you still would like to migrate it. So you would like to have tools that figure out what the application is and then enable you to take that to the cloud in a way that makes sense and to still have it functional. So we also have that part of capability with what we're looking at with Anthos Migrate. And the last part is the risk. So we oftentimes talk when we talk migration, we talk about moving you to the cloud and migrating you. But one aspect that's not often talked about is, well, what do you do if it doesn't work? You want to make sure you can actually go back on premise. And so the software for migration that you look at, you want to have a seamless way of actually moving to the cloud, but also back on premise. And so you want an environment that gives you that flexibility and gives you the same time frame or the same performance whether you go to the cloud or whether you come back on premise at any given time. So this is our solution. When we look at modernization and how we do it, so what I will tell you now is about our product, Anthos Migrate, that gives you this modernization aspect for your workloads. And what we modernize is that we take workloads running on bare metal, on virtual machines, whether it's on your on-premise or whether it's on a different cloud. And how do we take those workloads, Windows or Linux, and we move them over to GCP. And when it's Linux today, we actually move them into containers. And so it's a one-step process to get you directly to the container journey and to get you to run on GKE. And that's really the value here, the leap of technology we're taking into modernizing your VM running somewhere and then ending up as this VM runs in a container on GKE. And then you can leverage all the ecosystem of the things that we talk about around GKE. So this is our vision. It's about migrating and modernizing the VMs. And the way we will take you there is basically, it can be a one-step process, or it can be a multi-step process depending on how ready you are and where in your journey you are. And what you see here on this graph, we start to read this graph by the bottom left side, which is your starting point. You are either on-premise or another cloud, and you have a workload, okay? Then you can actually go directly and end your journey as running on the top left side as a container on GKE. You can do that directly with Anthos Migrate, or we can do it also in a two-step process with Anthos Migrate. So we can take you first to run on, for example, on GCP. So we can get your VM to run as a VM on Google Cloud and then modernize it, or we can modernize you directly. So depending on where you are in your journey, you don't have to wait for this, right? You can start and we can meet you in your journey of modernization where you are. Here is our approach, and our approach is this two possible phase. This is the journey of a migration, and I'm trying to show you here the life cycle, right? So we start with a pre-sale first environment where when we have conversations about migration, we talk about discovery. And what discovery is to figure out what your environment is, what really is happening in your IT environment. What applications are running, what are the dependencies, where are they located, what is their network, what are the security policies, and so forth. Then comes the migration planning, which is still more of a paper phase or discovery phase, which we start thinking about what are we going to migrate, when, and how. And then we go into our basically next step, which is our migration practice. And what you see here is two different trains that we can take. The top one that we run on GCE. So the top one is we take a VM running on premise, and then we go and run that as a migration, and we end up on GCE. So that's our lift and shift technology. And at the bottom one, you see our type of doing that with GKE. So similar processes, but it's just that we can adapt the journey to where you are. And this is why this is what we offer you with our software, with Anthos Migrate. So I want to go through the benefits of two things. I want to go over the VM to VM migration, and then I'll tell you about our VM to GKE migration, so the two different aspects of our product. What you see with our VM to VM migration is that we actually want to move you, it's our lift and shift, we want to move you to Google Cloud with a fast paced technology. The way we achieve that is we actually have a couple of key benefits. One is we have what we call real-time streaming. With real-time streaming, what we do is when we start your migration journey, see it as when you're running a VM on-premise, we start a VM on Google Cloud, on GCP. So in about 5 to 10 minutes, depending if it's Windows or Linux, we fire up the VM in GCP. The disk, the data, the storage of your initial VM is basically streamed to your destination VM on the cloud. And then we cache it, and we transfer the data in the background. So what this means for you is that you actually, within minutes, know if your migrated workload is actually operational. And you don't have to wait for the whole migration to finish to then test it and see if it's actually functioning. So within minutes, you can test the migration, and we can migrate storage in the background. This allows us to accelerate the migration and really to make it meaningful to you in a sense that you actually can understand if your destination result will actually work with what you want it to be. We don't need to install agents on your VMs. It's an agentless design. We can test before migration, and we can roll back. So with these benefits, what you see on the chart is you can actually, over time, migrate a lot more at scale VMs, and this is real customer data. You can migrate at scale thousands and thousands of VMs with our automated process. Right. And scale of operations. Another thing to show you here is the VMs. So say we take a 2-week migration journey, which is fairly typical for production migrations. First week is discovery, second week is the implementation. You can actually see that in our second week, the migration completes the VM starts running right away, and then the data being transferred in the background, we're actually getting you up and running very quickly in that second phase when it's the real migration. And that's with the technology that we have behind Anthos Migrate. Now, let's talk about the second point. So I told you about VM to VM migration. Now it's about VM to containers. Well, many workloads, so you're developing applications, and your new applications are, say, running on GKE or running as containers. But now you also have legacy workloads, and for those, you don't want to rewrite them. But if you can move them to the cloud and on GKE, then you can instrument them and interface them with the modern microservices that you're building and take advantage of the same benefits of GKE, where we manage the kernel for you. You have access to our CI/CD pipeline, where you can use other services such as Istio and Services Mesh, and interact with your microservice applications. So we take those legacy apps where rewrite is not an option, and we have it to run for you in a container on GCP. Why wouldn't you just do a lift and shift? Well, if you were just doing lift and shift and just moving it as a VM, you would get some benefits, but not as much as if you run as a container, especially when you are looking at, especially because of the modernization reasons that we were talking about. And then finally, we don't see the migration as a binary problem, right? So even we have customers that understand that containers, GKE, and so forth is interesting, although they don't see all the benefits right away. We can meet you where you are in your migration journey, and we can take you to that step forward to GKE. So it's a further toolbox that you have for your app. And another point here is, well, why do we do this? A big reason why this comes back is customers love GKE. GKE is today a leading container managed service that a lot of our customers just want to be on because of all the other benefits we have once you are on GKE. And legacy apps, once they're there, again, they're onboarded, you start to see the benefit of it. So now think about if you had to move to containers your own apps yourself and rewrite them or rebuild them, and you have to do that at scale. It's probably not something that's going to be either happening or that's going to be really appealing for you to do, so they may end up staying. So what we do with our capability of running these legacy workloads, middleware, databases, and so forth, we enable you to meet us in the cloud journey very quickly. And we run these containers, same as our VMs to VM migration. About 5 minutes or so, you're up and running with the data. What you saw today at our keynote was a migration of an online boutique app that would start to run on-premise and then goes to the cloud. It takes about a minute or so to move that app, and with our streaming technology. So I have another example which is fairly similar. This is about an SAP database, for example, where we do a migration. And what you see with that migration is the time it takes to run in the cloud and the time it takes to complete. So this was for 36 servers with 3.25 terabyte of data. The full migration was done in 36 hours. So completely complete end-to-end. Right? So that's the landscape, you know, that's what it takes with doing the live data migration. 36 hours. If you look at using Anthos Migrate, you're up and running in the cloud already in 3 hours. And that's a real production SAP large database. Okay. A little bit about our process. This is my last slide. This is just so you understand what happens. The modernization starts from Kubernetes itself. From GKE, we actually decide to start the migration with a YAML file. Then our initial point, starting point, is a data center where you have virtual machines running on. There's a hypervisor stacks, there's storage. This is the middle picture here. So GKE starts the modernization process with a YAML. And basically, our Anthos Migrate software moves those 2 VMs into 2 new containers on GKE, as you can see on your right-hand side here. And when they're on GKE, you basically can leverage all the ecosystem around that. Okay, so that's kind of the whole idea. The whole idea here is we start migrating from Kubernetes itself, and then we end up with these VMs running in specific clusters as stateful sets and up and running on Kubernetes. So once you're there, everything that's automation, pipeline, modern tools, orchestration, API management, services about security, mesh, Istios, and so forth are things you can leverage right away. Last slide. What can we migrate, right? So here is the example of our workloads. It's mainly going to be Tomcat, web server, web apps, multi-tier apps. It's going to be WebSphere, WebLogic. It's going to be databases. And basically, we support the operating systems that you see, which are Linux, Red Hat and CentOS, SUSE, and Ubuntu. Okay. So that's currently what we support in our environments. We are looking to do Windows, and we'll talk about that later on. But that's what we support currently with our product. Okay. So key benefits at a glance. Once you are on Kubernetes, here are the things that you can benefit from. First one is you can run your stateful app in GKE. 2, you have access to the security aspects of GKE that we offer. 3, you're moving fast in a standard containerized way. And then we offer you an easier to rebuild app to run in a modern environment, manageability, OS patching, and automated pipeline. So this is more of a summary key benefits, just to get everyone on board with what we're bringing on with Kubernetes. So with that, we have another about 20 minutes or so. What I'd like to do next is to actually talk to you about our real-world case studies. And in a second, I will call up actually while I call up our customers to come up on stage, what I wanted you to see is some examples of our applications that we can migrate and modernize. CRM application, for example, WebLogic, JBoss, SAP, all these are examples of things that we can migrate with to GKE. So with that, I would like to call our 3 customers on stage. We have Michael, Walker, and Luke that will join us, and so we can have a little panel for the remaining of the time. While they get set up, what I'd like to tell everyone, we also have a dory that's open. So if you have questions now that you'd like to ask, we can then follow up as questionnaire after that. So don't hesitate to use the dory, and now we'll go ahead and talk about the panel. So first, thank you for joining me. Thank you, Michael, Walker, and Luke. First thing I'd like to do is to ask you tell me about your companies. So tell me about what you're doing and how that pertains to cloud. So Michael, if you'd like to start maybe and and tell us
sure.
about Anthos and who you are and introduce your company?
Sure. So my name's Michael Kollar. I run cloud engineering for Anthos. We're a global managed service provider, and we help our customers, one, run existing workloads and systems, but also we help migrate them to cloud. And a lot of that is through whether it be fully transformed in the cloud, running full microservices and containers, or some of it is lift and shift. And we do it on a variety of platforms, including the legacy. So for us, a lot of legacy support where we integrate cloud modern technologies with legacy through things like Cloud Service Broker, Istio, and some of the transformation capabilities we get from Villustrata.
Thank you, Michael. Walker, how about you?
Yeah, hi, I'm Walker Miller. I'm from Cardinal Health. We are a global healthcare, pharmaceutical and medical supplies manufacturer and distributor. We have been in the process over the last couple of years of doing a massive migration from on-premise to cloud using, Villustrata at the time is what it was. We are just about finished. We'll be done in July with most of our production instances. And we've been experimenting a bit with this new product as well.
Thank you. Luke?
Hi. I'm Luke Webb. I'm on the cloud enablement team with Tyson Foods. So we're a food company. We did about $40 billion in sales last year across our 4 main BUs, which are beef, poultry, pork, and prepared foods. So we operate, across multiple states and multiple countries, and our IT workforce is also spread, across those locations. We started a cloud migration and a digital transformation about 18 months ago, and so we've been doing a lot of discovery, a lot of testing, a lot of deciding on how we want to do things. So we know how we want to do things, and we just want to figure out how to get there, right, to that end state. So we have a pretty aggressive cloud migration strategy, and Villustrata is going to be part of that.
Let's talk a little bit about scale, and I think Walker, you're one of our lead examples. Tell us about scale in terms of how large, or where are you in terms of that journey of migrating? You've experienced our product with migrating certain workloads and then moving a higher amount. How has that process been for you, and do you foresee a similar type of activity for potentially containers as you look at your modernization journey? Are you also thinking maybe scale, or are you thinking, how do you see that to fit kind of your model for your company?
Yeah, well, I think when we're done, we'll have migrated around 4,000 servers. We're probably about 75–80% done with that. We just got production to knock off. Probably getting closer to 85–90% here. So yeah, we've been doing it over a couple of years. Spent a lot of time doing discovery and analysis, which allowed us to be successful. As far as the container, I'm not really sure yet what that's going to look like. I think that's kind of new to us. We've been doing it internally with a few apps, just kind of building cloud native, just to get an idea. We'll be going live with our first production Kubernetes app in May. So we're still kind of early adopters in there as well for us. And I don't know what the end game is going to look like for that quite yet, but I have a feeling, an inkling, that containers are going to be a pretty integral part of that for all of our technology stack.
Thank you. Michael, we talked about a little bit earlier. You were telling me about migrations in general and containers. Do you foresee this technology it's something that you like to take for modernizing a lot of your customer breadth or activities with containers? How do you see that how do you see our new technology with containers to play a role for Anthos compared to, say, traditional lift and shift or moving to the cloud activities for basically your company?
Yeah, so we've built a platform in partnership with Google that we call the Orchestrated Hybrid Cloud. It's based on Kubernetes, and it's a container-based platform for microservice-based applications. One of the things we need to do is take legacy applications at scale and move them to containers, and essentially break down the dependencies that they had on operating systems, VMware, and some of the other proprietary technologies that we had. So in order to facilitate that, we needed a technology that allowed us to, one, do that separation, but then also create what I would say are smaller, more segmented apps, microservices, onto a modern platform that we could then integrate and then orchestrate, whether they be on-prem, because we have a requirement some of our customers still want infrastructure on-prem, like it or not, they've got regulatory requirements, things of that nature, but then also provide the way to scale it and integrate it with public cloud offerings that make more sense for them. So for us, containerization is critical to transform customers, and we have customers today that are building cloud-native applications that way, and also want to take some of the, what they would refer to as their low-hanging fruit, tier 3 and tier 4 apps that really don't make sense to keep on-prem anymore, that they could just move to the cloud and do that in a container-based approach and take full advantage of what Google has to offer there.
Thank you. Luke, how about you? So for Tyson Foods, how do you see that model to play? What type of applications potentially do you see for migration in general, I would say, to the cloud? What are the top of minds? And what are you thinking in terms of containers and migrations to that in terms of type of workloads that you're looking at?
Yeah, so I mean, everything in our data center is on the block for migration to the cloud. And containers are definitely part of our strategy. Anything cloud native that we're building, we're definitely pushing development teams to use Kubernetes, microservices, cloud functions, those kind of technologies. But as far as migrating what we have in our data centers today, we're not sure what all those things fit into Kubernetes, right? So we have a lot of ERP systems that maybe don't fit that model, but we do have some, web-hosted applications that definitely would fit in there, and we have a lot of Windows VMs, which aren't on the beta release of this software, but are on the roadmap. So we're interested to see, what comes in that space as far as Windows VM to Kubernetes migration tools.
Yep. Okay, great. In terms of, I would say, challenges, what do you gentlemen see as potentially current challenges for migration? Is it, what is it for you that's the biggest challenge, I would say, or one of the biggest challenge when you look at migrations? What are the blockers for you today, for your environments?
So I can give you two that we struggle with. So embedded security inside of apps.
Okay.
That's something that even when we do the discoveries and things like that, we don't typically find. Someone did role-based access. You go back in time, the products like Integrity and stuff like that did role provisioning dynamically for the user. So how that happens in the public cloud is going to be very different when we do that migration, because that service is no longer there. So we're going to have to do something to recreate it. The second area that we get a little hung up on is the ability to deal with or roll back, because the batch processes we have to support or downstream dependencies. Sometimes when we migrate an application or we containerize it, the same way that that app got triggered previously in its previous state is no longer the same way we would want to do it in the future, because the legacy systems don't understand event-based programming and things of that nature that we do for the new world. So we have to look at how do we deal with keeping some of those events or externalizing those events to keep some of the systems that don't come over in sync. So security and embedded types of batch processes and legacy type integration approaches are some of the inhibitors or blockers we see when we're migrating to containers.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I would say with the migration as a whole, I mean, our biggest problem was just knowing what talks to what. So discovery was our biggest challenge. Just because of the nature of on-prem and segregation of duties, you had application teams that didn't really fully understand how their applications worked with other things. So going through and digging through all the data we had to in order to figure out that was probably the biggest challenge we had, clearly the biggest challenge we had. As far as moving stuff to Kubernetes, the technology doesn't scare me at all. The technology is pretty sound.
Yep.
We've been playing with traditional web server application server in Kubernetes, and even just building it natively, it works well. That's not really an issue. If you're running on, at least on Linux, you're going to run in a container pretty well. One of the reasons we like Kubernetes over other options is that it allows you to run in that way too. You don't necessarily have to make it cloud native, or you don't have to be a microservice. You can be a traditional VM, so it I think the biggest challenge for us is going to be vendors, and just dealing with them and making sure they're willing to support us running into a container environment. I liken it the move from physical to VMs years ago, which I had the luxury of being around for. And when you went to a lot of vendors and said, "Hey, we want to run this in a virtualized environment," they just said, "No, we're not going to support it." And eventually that turn happened. And I feel like that turn will happen here as well.
I would say probably resource constraints have been our biggest challenge so far. Ever since we started our cloud journey, we've been on a big project. We had acquired another company that had their entire IT infrastructure, their own ERP system, so we've been combining those two. We were founded in 1935, so we're definitely a born analog company. We have a lot of old processes that got pushed into an ERP system. Well, we modified our ERP system. It's a highly customized system. So part of this journey is just a digital transformation to use SaaS software like SaaS software and not modify it unless there's some sort of distinguishing feature of Tyson operations. So really a lot of resources have been tied up in that effort. So resources and then skill set. When the resources are tied up elsewhere, they can't develop the cloud skills that they need to get onto this new platform for our next generation of applications. So a tool like VM to GKE is definitely very attractive if you can get a push button move into a new, more modern environment. Then you don't have to take all that time from your developers and your IT team to get them onto that new platform.
Yeah. So security is one aspect. Another aspect is basically talking about, you mentioned about support for applications from vendors when you go to the cloud and how are you supported. And another one is obviously what you mentioned as well with, the various things that you have to manage and then onboard them to the cloud. What we seem to see is a few things. So one is, I think that what you brought up, Walker, about the support for, certain supports on containers, I think this is more of a time constraint that's going to ease up, because I think it's something that we see that everyone wants to move to containers. So I think we start to see various companies more open on the support model. So I think that's more on the, I would say, support, and it's very important for production, but I think we'll get there. In terms of security and what we do for, once your containers, I think that what we're now working on Istio with the service mesh is going to be really compelling in terms of adding more security, and then with Nomos and identity to be able to basically have a user. So if you are on an Active Directory Windows type of environment, now you can actually, if you take our Anthos Migrate software now, we can actually directly map to users that are in ADs to be moved to containers to GKE with the IAM settings of GCP. So I think the security aspect is definitely key because we want to make sure we conserve that. But that's a really interesting problem that we're looking to solve. And then, you mentioned, Luke, I think also Windows and Windows containers. So Windows is a big thing, especially for legacy applications. This comes oftentimes, well, I'd love to go to GKE, but I have Windows. So what do I do with Windows? We're actually working on the Windows part. This is something you will see later on. It's on our roadmap. We started now with Windows and containers. So this is, we're starting to have alpha and early access type of things. So I think the Windows part is something that we're definitely aware on and working on. But in terms of getting into containers, our software really has the value of taking your VM and booting it up as a stateful set on GKE. So we're not yet at a stage where we break an application into microservices, but the first step of what we're doing is we take your legacy VM and then we get that to boot up and run in a container, and then it can start to interface with other things. And at the same time, once it's on containers, you actually get more scale. So you could actually get a lot more workloads to run on a GKE cluster versus, say, a VM cluster. So these were kind of things where we are. What I wanted to ask you guys is maybe what would be a one top of mind thing that you would like to see in the product, or what are the things that you're thinking of, once you're on containers, what would you like to see that may be missing or that is top of mind for you as a next step to maybe get you more towards a container environment? Anyone?
Well, I think you just touched on it for us. So getting a VM or a legacy app up into containers is great, but it doesn't break it down into a microservices type architecture for you. So just like Walker mentioned, that the discovery is the hardest part. So anything that a tool could do to help you discover how an application talks to other applications and what databases it is required of, those kind of things would really be helpful.
The full integration with Istio is going to be nice. Again, in the idea of discovery, if we had a service mesh like Istio in place, or any service mesh in place for that matter, that would have made that a lot easier, because we would have been able to see those interactions a lot better than we do now. So service mesh is kind of high on our list for just kind of all of our workloads.
And I would like those to see, given that we spend a lot of times integrating with legacy systems with our customers, understanding how we can provide the mapping back to the legacy within it as part of the discovery process to keep those two worlds in sync as we progress them forward.
So moving basically integration with CSM, how to move these apps, and how do we do microservices. So the microservices part is something that we're thinking to do as it's in our ideas, and that's something hard to do. Is now once you are on a container and you run as a stateful set, well, you'd like that to become microservices. So how do we break that monolith application that's stateful to get you to a stateless, serverless, completely, autonomous type of application? So that's also something that is part of what we're thinking about in terms of solving. But now that we're looking at basically taking you on GKE and moving forward with that. So I'm personally very excited to collaborate with you guys on this, and for you to be our partners, on the journey as we started, all these testing and product. So we'll continue basically that and iterate on it. So that's really what, that makes sense. It's taking VMs, getting people on containers, scaling it out at big scale, thousands and thousands of workloads, and then giving you the flexibility of the cloud, right? So that's really what we had for the panel. So I'd like to thank you very much for being here with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.